obviously we are, all of us here are Alexander Technique lovers and believers. And I still have that problem with, some of my students that, like you said, there's a certain sense that Alexander Technique is this airy-fairy thing. And, you should really go and have physio and that's going to fix your problem, which is, in my opinion, obviously not true. And, and I was always really fascinated by the science of it. And in fact, the first book that I ever read about it, it was by Wilfred Barlow, and it was quite scientific already, right? So I feel like this is great that you were able to put this data, right, numbers that says, okay, well, you play your way, and this is the amount of tension you have. You play with this sort of newly found set of directions, and now this is the tension that you have, and I think that really in the long run can help people understand that this in fact is not something, it's not like cleaning your aura or something like that, and then you're going to play violin better, right? But anyway, but aside from that, what I really am, I'm a sort of a violin nut job, and I'm really always looking at how the way that people play, how they use their bodies. There was a time before YouTube where there was this DVD called The Art of Violin, which I watched every day, for a long period of months. So, so my question to you, Alison, is that once you started doing your Alexander Technique lessons back in the day when you had your injury, did it help you at first? And more importantly, did it make you change your violin technique, your playing technique? And if so, how? Because that's going to tie in with my questions later, that I believe that this is a great first step, but at the end of the day, there's no let's say long-term improvement unless you're actually you revisit your violin technique and the principles of playing the instrument, and you change them. So that's the question for you.
Yeah. I know plenty of Alexander teachers, including the one that I had some lessons from whilst I was at the Royal College, and I must stress it's not who's there now. The violin just never came into it. I went with one or two other students, and we just thought that the Alexander technique was kind of weird, and we just thought it was it wasn't relevant. We couldn't see how it was relevant. So that was also partly my reluctance when this consultant said to me in 1986, I think, or 87, you need to go and have some Alexander lessons. I was like, oh no, I've tried that. Oh God, I don't really want to do that because, that's weird. But actually in my lessons, it was a very different experience. But I very distinctly remember the first lesson as being when Victoria explained about the Alexander technique to me and why I was getting the shoulder problem that I had, which was just constant. And I now know it wasn't really an injury as such. It was just long-term pain that developed from playing the violin in the way that I'd just learned over, by default, really. The explanation that she gave me was the first explanation that made any sense. So I'd had lots of people saying to me, how long can you play the violin for before it hurts? That was one question that in the end drove me nuts, because I hurt all the time. It didn't make any, I'd stopped playing the violin by then, and I hurt all the time anyway. My shoulder just hurt 24/7. They had this thing back then where you stopped playing and then you gradually built up your playing again, and that was meant to sort things out. You'd been and had some physio or some acupuncture or whatever, which didn't make any difference to me either. It just cost me a lot of money and made me bankrupt.
Just like when Alexander stopped speaking, right?
Yeah, so. Exactly the same thing. So my experience in my first lesson was, oh, okay, that makes sense. And more importantly, my shoulder during the lesson stopped hurting for the first time ever. Nobody else had stopped it hurting. So I literally, I can't remember how many people I'd seen, but I'd been following, the conventional route, going to a doctor, being referred to a consultant. I'd even been to the New Musicians Clinic, as it was called back then, and then been sent on to a couple of physios. I'd seen an osteopath and acupuncturist. None of it made any difference. So my first lesson was very clearly, already I was kind of hooked, as in this is something that's going to help, begin to make some sense. So that's my first memory of it. I can't really remember much about the actual lessons individually. But I do remember taking my violin along to Victoria and then being quite distressed by the fact that she was telling me I would have to change my playing completely. And I was having to sort of look at how I stood, how I picked up the violin, and basically I couldn't play then. I just couldn't play in the position that I was meant to play in. So that was quite frustrating. And actually, I don't think I took it back. I don't think I took my violin back. I think I just stopped. And I was probably a really difficult student, and it was coming up to the summer holiday. And the idea had been that I take the rest of the year off from sort of January, because I've got a place on a postgraduate orchestral course, which doesn't exist now, but I was leading the orchestra. So that was probably what had brought all my problems to a head, is that I was playing 6 hours a day when I wasn't used to it. And then I was practicing because I'm a rubbish sight reader. And so I had to practice everything if I was in the orchestra. I still do. So I eventually stopped because I couldn't deal with it. So in the January, I decided to stop completely. And then I was going to go back the following year in September. And it just became very apparent that I wasn't going to be able to. So that's when I went on the training course. I started in June, I think, June, July, and started seriously the following year. Initially, I don't think it did help my violin playing because I just couldn't bring myself to look at it. And also because the whole training course was so full on. So in a way, the violin just took second place. I mean, I was devastated as well. So I kind of put it to one side. Yeah, still cracks me up, really. So yeah, ask me another question.